Hey folks, Tate here with Do All Outdoors. Today we are doing another assembly video. This is going to be the Flyway 4x4. So we're going to do it in a couple sections. Right now I'm just going to get the cart put together. Relatively simple. There's not too many parts involved here. Just the two axles, the top of the cart, and then the tow bar. For that, all we got is 8 bolts to attach the axles to the cart itself, and then one large bolt and nut to attach the tow bar to the front axle there. So we will get started and get this taken care of. We are going to be using 4 of these bolts per axle and 2 washers and a nut per bolt. We've got a 14mm head on the nut, or on the bolt, and a 13mm nut. So what we're going to do is slide one washer onto the head of the bolt and then take the other washer and the nut off. I just had them together so I wouldn't lose them. And what we will do is lift one end of the cart here, kind of get it lined up. And again, we're just going to put the one bolt with a washer through the top. I'm just going to get one on each side here so I can get a little bit of stability. And then we'll slide the other washer and the nut on the end of the bolt. And again, we're using a 14mm socket for the bolt and a 13 for the nut. So I'll tighten these two up and then I'll move on to the others. Take my other 2 bolts here for the rear axle, get those started by hand. All right, now we're going to move on to the front axle here. And we're going to make sure that the piece that the tow bar is going to connect to is pointing outwards from the cart. And we'll go with the same process here. Put a couple in by hand just to get a little stability before I tighten them up. And we'll put the remaining 2 on, and then we will have the axle assembled onto the cart. Then we'll finish up with the tow bar before we move to putting the trap on top. All right, now that we've got those axles on the cart, we're going to take a 19mm socket and we're going to get the tow bar assembled here. So you got this large bolt with a washer and that 19mm nut. And what we're going to do is make sure this roller piece here is touching on the spring versus the other way around. You're going to have issues if you try assembling it in reverse. So we'll slide this bolt through one side. And then we'll put our washer and nut on the other. From there, we'll take channel locks or pliers on one side of the bolt here to hold her tight, while I use that 19mm socket to tighten up the other side. All right, so now we got our cart assembled. From here, I'm gonna go grab the trap and then we'll get that assembled on top of the cart. All right, now that we got our cart assembled, we're going to put the wobbler on and the trap on top of that. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna start with this wobbler adapter plate. You can see it's got 4 holes here. What we're gonna do is we'll use these 2 holes in the front and the one in the rear. They're gonna match up perfectly on the back of the cart here. And we've got 3 bolts for this, about the same size as the bolts for the cart. 14mm head, 2 washers, and a 13mm nut per each. So I'll just get all 3 of these started before I tighten them up. Okay, so we got the wobbler base set on here. Now we're going to put the wobbler on top of that. And we're going to have it oriented so the power switch is facing the tow handle on the cart. And for these, we've got some littler bolts that have a 10mm head on them. And again, we've got 2 washers and a nut per bolt. And these have a 10mm head on them, as well as a 10mm nut on the bottom. All right, there we go. All right, now we got our wobbler on the cart. We're going to move on to getting the trap head set on top of that wobbler. And to begin that, I'm just going to take the trap head and flip it upside down. I'll do it right here on the cart. Then we're going to take our trap base, and what we're going to want to do is make sure this curved portion is facing back towards the power switch, as that's going to be the variable angle. And for this, you're going to have 4 larger bolts with a 17mm head on them. what you're going to want to do is take the bolt, and that goes through the base, and then you're going to use the plastic washer between the base and the trap head to keep from getting too much friction between the two items. And this always works best if you're able to put the trap upside down. Otherwise you're trying to balance that trap head all while you're tightening everything up and sliding these washers in the middle. All right, so I'll switch to that 17mm socket and tighten these up. All right, from here we're going to flip this over. We're going to get the trap set on top of the wobbler, and we're going to use the 4 bolt patterns that match up with the top of the wobbler there. For this, we've got some longer bolts, about 2 inches with an 1.5 inch spacer in between, just to keep a little distance between the thrower and the wobbler. So on this, again, we want to make sure we've got that power switch facing towards the tow handle. And I'm going to remove a nut and a washer from each of these and take that spacer off. We're going to keep 1 washer on that long bolt. And what we're going to do, this is easier with 2, but it can be done with 1. Make sure I get the right bolts. So they're the very outer bolts on this trap base. What you want to do is take that bolt with a washer on it and then put that through the trap base. From there, you're going to put the spacer on it between the trap base and the wobbler, and then you're going to slide on a washer and the nut. And I always like to do it, start with one corner and then move to the exact opposite corner. It'll help balance things out. All right, and then I'll just tighten those 2 before I move on to the remaining. Tighten them up a little bit, but I don't want to get them all the way tightened, as it'll be hard to slide in the remaining spacers. But just to get it balanced out a little bit, tighten them up a little bit here. All right, and then I'll move on to the other 2 corners. And we're doing the same on all of them. The bolt with 1 washer on it slides through, and then between the trap base and the wobbler, we'll put those spacers. Secure it with another washer and the nut below, and then we'll tighten them all. Okay, now we've got the frame here mounted up. I will continue onwards and install the safety ring and the stacker poles, and then we'll finish with the main spring. So we've got our 2 safety studs here, threaded on one end and just smooth on the other. We'll thread these from the outside in. This is what the safety ring will slide into in the rear of the trap. And then from there, we will take our 2 safety ring arms, and we've got 4 black Allen bolts here, which have a 4mm head on them. And we point these arms facing forward, going through the 2 front holes on each side of the front of the trap here. And repeat on the other side. All right, once we got those on, you could do the safety ring right after that, but I find it easier to move on to the stacker poles to avoid running into that safety ring at all times. So when you get the trap, it's going to have 4 black caps here on these studs. You'll have 8 stacker poles, 2 or 4 of which are going to have an open hole on one end, and those just slide right onto those studs. And after that, you're going to take one of the 2 horseshoes and the remaining 4 stacker poles, which have a female thread on one end and a male thread on the other end. Horseshoe opening facing the power switch. If you mount it reversed with the opening facing outward, you may have some feeding issues. So just keep in mind that the opening should always face the rear of the trap, the power switch, the tow handle, however you want to explain that. And once these are on, they do just slide up and off for easy transport as well. From there, we'll take our last remaining horseshoe and we're going to slide on the 11mm bolts, just 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch bolts, and slide them onto the female threads here on top of the stacker poles. Again, horseshoe opening facing the rear or the power switch of the trap. And these don't have to be real tight. Just snug enough on the top so that they won't come loose. Okay, now we got those stacker poles on the top. We will put on our safety ring. The way I find easiest is to start at the front of the trap and slide each end through the safety ring arms, going back towards the rear of the trap. And then they slide right into the safety ring studs that we put on earlier. All right, so that safety ring is installed. Now we're going to do the very last part, which is installing the mainspring and the spade bolt, which is going to come with a couple nuts on there. What we're going to want to do is point that arm straight outward in that 12 o'clock position. Go underneath the trap here. There's going to be a little eyelet. You're going to want to hook your mainspring onto that eyelet, then hook the other end onto this spade bolt. Slide the spade bolt through the rear of the trap. Got a little hole down here, and tighten this up. So usually what I would recommend is just, I'm not going to tighten it all the way today, but kind of put your hand on this spring as you're doing it with the arm out in the 12 o'clock position. Once you start to feel a little tension there, that's a good starting point, because as the arm winds up, it's going to carry a lot of strength in the spring and stretch it out. So give it a few tries at that before you tighten or loosen the spring at all. Usually there's about 3 to 4 threads exposed here on the back of the spade bolt. But at this point, you should be ready to roll this cart out to the field and have some fun.